Okay. Hi, Rhonda. How are you?
I'm good, Douglas. Very well. How are you doing
Doing
today?
fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
Thank you for having me.
Right off the bat, I want to start with music because, according to your bio, you are a musician, teacher, and conductor. You've got a master's degree in music. So I assume you are a music teacher. Is that correct?
Yes, I actually taught in the public schools for a couple of decades, actually, really 20, 25 years. And over a course of 35 years, I've taught anything from pre-kindergarten all the way up through the college level. And I'm currently conducting adults at this point.
So conducting meaning like symphony orchestra, maestro?
Yes, that's actually what I do. I stand up there and wave my arms and run people through rehearsals. And I am conducting currently a concert band named the Southwest Civic Winds, and I'm also the assistant director of the Durango Choral Society. So I direct singing groups as well.
Now, I don't know if you knew this about me or not, but I'm also a musician. But I'm at the
Yes,
other end of the spectrum from you in the sense that everything I learned from ear. I have no
right.
formal training. I don't know music theory very well.
Hmm.
And in fact, when I took music theory in college, I failed it uh, because
So,
the teacher that I had insisted that I would not be an accomplished musician without it.
oh dear.
And so I wanted to get your take on that, and then we'll get to your book. I know you're
Okay, sure.
here to promote a book, but what do you think about that? Because there are people like yourself. I am assumed you know theory quite well,
Yes, yes, I do.
and you
Yes.
studied it, and okay. And then there are people like me who write songs, who sing, who play piano, who just
Hmm.
learned it by ear, who don't really know music theory at all, and some very famous artists like the Beatles and Elton John,
Right.
people like that, have no formal training. How important is it to know music theory to be a good musician?
Well, let me reassure you that that your place in the music world is every bit as valuable as my place and those of us that know music theory in the music world. And I know a lot of people that have had difficulties with music theory. I don't know why, but also, I've had an easy time with that. I'm definitely what you would consider to be classically trained. And at the same time, I don't have the capacity like you do, or my daughter, for example. She's a young songwriter, and I don't have that capacity that a lot of people do to pick a melody out of the air and compose and write lyrics to it and arrange it in that sense. So I have different capacities. So I think it's just something that comes with a long time of training. And music theory in my world is really important, and thank God I have a facility for it. But it's not the most important thing in the world, and you're still every bit of a musician as people who know music theory. So I hope you feel encouraged by that.
Well, I do actually. And I'm curious, what do you play?
My main instrument is the flute. That is a
Okay.
music education major. When I went through college, I had to learn how to play kind of all the instruments, really, brass, woodwinds, strings, percussion, so that when I went into the public schools as a young band director, I could teach a kid how to put a clarinet together and how to play it and how to put the reed on and things like that. So I have a pedagogical foundation in all of those instruments. I wouldn't perform on them, but my main instrument is flute. And then later on in my life, probably about maybe 10 years or so of being in the field of music education, I came around more to choral conducting and vocal performance. And so I have a background in that as well.
Okay, so if somebody puts a piece of sheet music in front of you, you could just rattle it right off on the flute, right?
Yes, I could.
Okay. But if somebody said, "Here, can you play this?" and they sang something to you, would you have more difficulty to pick that out?
Now, I do have a good ear, and I have a good ear. I can pick things up by ear, but I think what I was getting at earlier is people like you who actually compose music, where you're creating something. And the way I liken that is like you're literally pulling a melody or a chord progression out of the air and saying, "This is what I'm hearing in my head right now, so I'm going to put this to music." I don't really have that capacity yet.
Okay, but if I did something like that and
Hmm.
and gave it to you, you could
Yes.
actually uh, note it, denote it, I suppose.
Yes, I absolutely could do that. Yes.
Okay, well, see, I think there's value in what both of us do. I think,
I sure do too. Yeah.
as a team, we would be pretty good.
We'd be good, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that makes sense. And in fact, even if you look at a group like the Beatles, George Martin, who was their producer, had your
Right.
skills,
Uh-huh.
and then
The more classic, right, right.
yeah, and he could take what they were doing and add to it
Mm-hmm.
and create all of these sort of
Right.
arrangements around their basic song.
Because I didn't know that, and I have to tell you that the Beatles were my absolute favorite band when I was a kid growing up. I had posters of them all over my walls, so I love that you use them as an example. And actually, I knew George Martin was their producer, but I never realized that he added musically to what they did. So I think that's a great tidbit for me to learn today.
Oh, well, he did. And in fact, I mean, not so much in the earlier days, but from basically Rubber Soul on, when they immersed themselves into the studio and started getting incredibly creative. I mean, all of that, if you listen to Sergeant Pepper, all of that strings and all of that stuff, he arranged all of that.
Oh, that's great. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, he was definitely an intricate part of their sound in the later part of their career. So, yeah, there's definite value to having both of that. The one thing about theory that always perplexed me was it seemed very mathematical. And I was never a math student, so I think that turned me off to it right away. I went, oh, this is too much like math.
That might be the case. I know for me, I actually had a facility with math, and I notice with music students in general, kids who study music from an early age tend to have higher test scores in math. It's just something that we tend to know in the industry. So there's definitely a connection between the two.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for all of that. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Let's
Sure.
talk a little bit about your book. Your book is called Of Song and Water. It
Yes.
says it'll be released on April 19th.
Yes,
Okay. Now, is this your first book, or have you written
it
other
is.
books?
No, it's actually my first book. I kind of imagined myself writing a book at this time of my life. I'm in my 50s and thought I would write a book 20 years ago, frankly. But at that time in my early 30s, I realized that I didn't have enough life experience. I just didn't know enough. So I always imagined myself writing a book in my 50s, and I started this 4 years ago. There was just a moment where I realized it was time to start writing, and here it is.
Is this a memoir?
It is.
Oh, all right. Okay. Well, aside from your teaching career and music, what can the reader expect to read about? Was there any big trauma or anything in your life that people are going to go, ooh?
Well, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a memoir, and really the focal point of it is the message is for all of those of us, which is pretty much everybody who goes through a challenge, goes, as you say, a trauma, a difficult time. How is it that we find our way through it? For me, how I find my way through things is having a connection to music and also nature. And the focal point of the book, in terms of what happened with me and with my family, is my stepson Elliot. 8 years ago, he died of an accidental drug overdose, and it was just crushing to our family. Of course, I have my husband; it was his son, and my husband and I have a daughter together. And at the time, she was a teenager. And so going through that, which was, of course, traumatic, and I think something that a lot of people can relate to. People have family members who are addicted, who are having these kinds of challenges and, feel helpless at times in terms of knowing how to deal with the situation or get through these challenges. And then after that happened, or kind of really at the same time, my husband started exhibiting symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And so that became this whole other layer of challenge on top of what we already had. And how it was that our family navigated through that time and really pulled ourselves through it. And the way I guided my family, I'm a very spiritually oriented person. So I like to be out in nature. I like to be connected with God, as whatever you want to call our creative force and our creator. And how it is that we navigated through that time. For me, finding better health, being connected with music, finding hope, finding healing, and helping to guide my family through what we were being faced with, so that we could arrive at a better place. And I'm happy to say now that 8 years later that we're in a much better place. And so it's even though we deal with some pretty heavy subject matter in the book, it's actually, I find, really entertaining and humorous, and ultimately a very hopeful message at the end of the book, because my husband ended up kind of turning his health around a bit, and our family really ended up just being stronger, even though we really suffered through, quite a bit of loss. And so I'm hoping that it reaches a lot of people, because I feel like people all around the world, frankly, are dealing with these kinds of issues, whether it's a chronic illness or whether it's the loss of a loved one or addiction issues. So that's really the gist of the book.
How old was your son when he passed away?
He was 25 years old.
Oh, very young. Yeah.
Right. He was already kind of living on his own, but really very troubled, and had emotional difficulties. And so his, what really was the strong addiction for him was alcohol, but kind of led to other things. And it was, like I said, it wasn't planned, but it was, a very difficult thing for our family to go through.
Had you been in contact with him, or did he sort of disappear from your family?
No, he actually lived in the same town that we did, and we were in very close contact with him. But he, like I said, was living on his own, so it wasn't like we could supervise him at that point. He wasn't like a kid living in our house anymore.
How long did he struggle with his addictions before he finally passed away, do you think?
He really, I speak about this, in the book a bit. He really started exhibiting what I would call addictive tendencies, even from the time he was a young child, where he would be addicted to sugar, or just, basically when I say an addictive tendency, it's like using anything. It could be a substance, it could be food, it could be anything, using it in a way to help get through difficulties. Instead of basically having the capacity to head out, to deal with things straight on, whether it's emotional difficulties or just challenges in life. So he just really kind of struggled from a very young age. I met him when I started dating my husband. My stepson, Elliot, was 6 years old. And so I started noticing, he had difficulties. He was very intelligent academically, but emotionally, he had difficulties in school. He had difficulties with friends. And so by the time he was a teenager, he was already venturing into that whole world of smoking pot and drinking. And then he went away to college, and then it, kind of got worse. And even with therapy and all those things, it was just really challenging reaching him. And he just wasn't, frankly, in a place where he was wanting to be reached. So it was a hard situation.
We do have to kind of wind this down. So your book is called Of Song and Water.
Yes.
And it will be released April 19. Is this going to be available in all formats, ebook, audiobook?
Yes, it's actually available right now in ebook on all formats: Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, any of whatever your favorite ebook platform is. And you can pre-order it now through, again, any distributor. It could be your local bookstore, your favorite independent bookstore, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's coming out, and I'm really excited about it. My hope is the pre-orders are doing well, and I'm looking forward to really connecting with audiences in the future to see if I can pass on any experience and wisdom to people who are going through similar things.
Well, that's great. Do you have a website you want to give out?
I do, actually. It's RhondaLMuckerman.com.
Okay, Muckerman, right?
Yes, Rhonda L. Muckerman.
Okay, great. Well, Rhonda, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story.